Thanks, Millie, and good evening, everyone. I'm Udendra Geeganage, and I'm a web editor at the Parliament of Sri Lanka. Okay, so this is my topic, what you see on screen, translating for multilingual websites. Some points that first I want to know whether there are any people here involved with website localization. Any experience, people? Okay, one, good. Okay, I'll carry on. But my talk is not on website localization, right? It's about translation. Translation is only one component of localization, right? So, let's move on. These three terms, multilingual websites and translation. I'm sure that you all know the meaning of these three terms, but I want to stress on these three terms because that's what my talk will be based on. Multilingual means, okay, I'll start with the second one. Websites, you all know. I'll be talking about websites. I wouldn't be talking about web applications or client-side software that runs on your PC or your laptop. I'm talking about websites, okay? Multilingual. Multilingual means any website. A multilingual website is a website that has two or more languages. So it can be bilingual, trilingual, and etc. Translation. What do you mean by translation? This is what I got from Wikipedia. I know this formatting is very rough because we ran into some problems with the slides. So we did it just now. This is how Wikipedia has it. Communication of the meaning of a source language text by means of an equivalent target language text. So there's a source language and there's a target language. So if your source language, if you're translating from English to Sinhala, your source is English, and your target language will be Sinhala, which my talk will be based on in a local context, that's the Sri Lankan context. Normally, our source language is, more often than not, English. That's the real situ. Because it's sometimes known as the protocol language, or it's used as the base language. We don't see it happening the other way, from Sinhala to English, or from Tamil to English, or from Tamil to Sinhala, or vice versa when it comes to website translation. There are few occasions that has happened, but the norm or the practice is use English as the base and then translate to Tamil or Sinhala. Anyone has seen this term, T9N, before? You? Sorry, your name, I don't know. Asanga, have you? 118N. Okay, I'll come to that. Good. This is a notation, T9N, and this is called a numeronym. Yeah, that's how you spell it. Oh, sorry about that. Test that. It's made up, they take the two letters at the end of the word, T and N, then they count the number of letters in the middle, so that's 9, and they put it there. So it's very easy to write translation, it's T9N. And there are other notations also now, say, now if it's internationalization, as you said, it's I18N. And for localization, it's L10N. So you can keep on counting the letters, but not now. So translation is conversion of one text in a language to another text, basically. I have a little diagram because, see, I said that this is not about localization or internationalization. There's a little diagram that I want to share with you. I18N, internationalization, right? Now, why I said that I'm talking about translation, see, T9N is the smallest component. Within internationalization, you localize for specific countries, right? Say for Sri Lanka, for India, for Italy, for UK, for whatever country, you localize. That's within I18N. L10N is localization. When you do that, when you localize for each and every country, the process as a whole is called globalization, which is referred to as G11N. So translation, T9N, is just a part of localization, or L10N. It's just a component, and I say that's the most important component of localization, leaving out the architecture, design, and other considerations. These are the two that we have to consider when translating a website or a web page. First one, it's the user interface terminology. You know, when you say terminology, it's the labels, the text in the menu, and say JavaScript validation messages, whatever, you know, when you type something incorrect, it says, please enter your email address correctly, or please enter your name. Those are the terminology. And maybe even small label texts, say username, your password, error messages, etc. The second one is content. It's the content of the page itself. You have a page, you say you have a page on the beaches at Unawatuna. And then there's a big text with images and etc. That's the content, what I'm referring to. So, translating UI terms and content, it's two things. Okay. We start with terminology. This is the first point I wanted to stress on. Be layout conscious. What I mean by layout conscious is, say you're given a term to translate, and you're the translator. So you translate. When it's sent to you, you translate. But you have no idea of where this term will fit in the web page. Whether it's a form, or whether it's some description, whether it's a caption of an image, you have no idea. And you don't know how it will fit in the layout of the web page itself. You don't know, you have no idea. For that, you have to see the layout. You have to see the screen before translating, right? I'll show you some examples once again. Have I got to? This is a little screenshot that I took out from a form, right? It asks for a date range, keywords, and then there's a little label in, and there's a drop down, all. In is the term that I'm going to show you. Now I'll take the equivalent Sinhala or the Tamil screenshot of this. See, in Sinhala it says Sevum Vachanaya, then the text field, the drop down, and Tula. In English it was on this side or on the left side. When it comes to Sinhala, it has come to this side because that's how the language constructs itself. If you want your form to be user readable and to be very intuitive for your user, it's very important that you follow this. So without being layout conscious, if you just translate something and put it where it is, right? Yeah. What I say is it's not perfect. It's not perfect. Same in Tamil. See? The Kanapadulu. Right? So it depends. Sinhala and Tamil, the grammar and the construct of the languages are much more similar than Sinhala to English or English with Tamil. So it's more or less the same, but there are times that it may differ. That's once again the English one. In, all. So you can read it. From this date to this date, these keywords in whatever. That's what I meant by layout conscious. So to achieve this, please give your translator the layout or a draft print screen at least, right? When you give your translator, because I have experienced that people send us translations, right? They just send it in an Excel or in a Word, and they tell us to translate. Okay, no problem, not a big deal. We can just translate. That's very simple. But when the translator terms go into the web page, it looks very funny. When we read it, it looks very funny and very awkward. So please give your translator the layout or your UI, even a draft, and especially the context. This is one of our messed up slides, another one. The second point I want to stress is to keep it simple. Now, say you have to say a very small instruction, right? People keep on writing long sentences for a little instruction. Say, enter a name. Now, in English, I say enter a name. Then Sinhala translator goes on, Karunakara obage nama atul karan. Now, when he types it and it goes into the web page, then it messes up with the layout, it wraps the text, and there are lots of problems that you run into. So keep it simple. Convey only the message. Just because you know many terms and you are very good at grammar doesn't mean that you can write really long sentences like paragraphs. So keep it simple. That's my second point, which this slide doesn't show. Okay, this is the next point. Focus on meaning rather than direct translation. What I said. There are two ways of translating, right? That one is translating the meaning. Next one is one-to-one translation or direct translation. That's the more, if you give it to a technical or a professional translator, what they do is they translate one-to-one. But there are guys who translate the meaning. They don't take this word, the second word, the third word, and do the translation likewise. They translate the meaning. That's what I prefer. That's what I'm telling you, to go with the meaning. This send button, what you see, is an example, right? This is an example because how the user thinks, you need to make your user understand. Okay, if I ask you, in Sinhala, what's the meaning of send? Yavanna. Any other words? No, that's correct. Yavanna, yes. Evanna? Right, good. Okay, now Evannada, Evannada. That's my question. What would you say? Now someone sends this to translate, right? You're the translator, and you're given the screen of it also. You're given the form of it also, and you're told to translate. What are you going to do? You're going to put it as Evanna or Yavanna? In Tamil, it's Anupuha, so I guess that's it, right? It seals the problem. But in Sinhala, Evanna or Yavanna. Now, there's a solution, right? There's a solution. You have to think as your user. The person who comes to your website, right? If you're directly talking throughout the form sequence, if you're talking to him, right? When you compare or when you go through your form, you can have a feel, right? Then you need to tell him to send it to me, Evanna, right? But if this button redirects him to somewhere else or gives him the impression that this data is submitted to an external entity, then use Yavanna. So the context is very, very important. If you change the two, or if you swap the two, then it will be a bit confusing to your user as well. He wouldn't feel very, very complete about it. So these 2 points, keep it simple and focusing on meaning. These go together. You can't separate. It's like two sticks, balancing each other. Next one. Original terms within quotes. Why do I say original terms within quotes? Because, as I said, when English is used as the base language or the protocol or whatever, right? You have the freedom. Now, when it comes to technical terms, you don't have the Sinhala term. You don't have the English term, right? You can look up glossaries. There are glossaries. There is a Microsoft glossary. There is a glossary published by the NIE, right, which they teach these O-level and A-level students, and something for reference for the teachers. But still, there aren't sufficient terms in Sinhala or Tamil. So what I suggest is, right, the user's understanding is the important, once again. So you can use. Now see, if you say mouse or blog, those are actually English terms. Those are not original Sinhala terms. So if someone says mushike, okay, if he wants to use mushike, it's okay, right? There are some people who still use the word mushike for mouse. But if you say mushike and someone doesn't understand what the hell is this person referring to, your objective is, that's, it hasn't happened. So you want the person to make it understandable. For blog, there are, there are bitti satahana, vyunu satahana, lots of terms. Those are very lovely, I know. You can use it, no problem. But when you say blog, that person knows what a blog is. In Sinhala, you can type it as Albayana, Loyana, Algayan. It's not a big deal. So you have that freedom. Use that freedom. I don't see any issue in it. Unless there's one factor which I'll be talking at my last slide. There you'll have to resort to the other way. I'll talk about it later. So for all this, you need to be innovative. The last point. For all these, you need to be an innovator. You have to think out of the box. You have to think creatively. Otherwise, you cannot, okay, the keep it simple thing is missing. You cannot focus on these points. To do a translation like this, you have to be innovative and creative. Be innovative, because I have seen, now I started translating informally like 8 years ago, and I even volunteered for Google in your language, There may be few people who have volunteered for that even here. So when I translated some terms for Google, what I thought was, now Google is not going to come after me if I do a wrong translation, right? I'm a volunteer, right? So there was an element of creativity. Of course, they give the placeholder, the label, right? You can't break that format. But staying in that, you could be innovative, creative. So that's how I first started before I joined the legislature 5 years ago, and then I had to work in a formal capacity. That's a separate story. Next, content. Our second point. So after terminology, this is the next point that we'll be talking. Again, focus on meaning. No need to stress on this again. Focus on meaning, right? Instead of direct translation. If you are translating, you have to. Because I'm stressing on this with my experiences. I have, even we have professional translators. We have interpreters, the best in the country, working in my institution. But still, if you send them a page with technical terms or something to do with computers or whatever, right? They really don't do a good job sometimes. But that's not their fault. They are professionals and they do the direct translating. That's their job. Because if there's a lack of terms, then even they are in trouble. So they have to look up glossaries, and if there are no glossaries, so then that's another problem. So focus on meaning. Focus on the meaning that your user expects to read and understand. Again, you can use the original terms when necessary, right? Especially when translating the technical terms, as I said. Use correct spellings. There is there are some people that don't, they say don't make an issue of this. The Nana-Lala conflict that they say. But my this is really tough, right? Now, Dharana or Dharana? Which one is correct? Anyone very confident? This or this? No, no, okay, I'll say in English. The meaning I want is not the coil. Not the coil Dharana, right? The other one. Bearing. Bearing. Okay. Now you should get it. Bearing. Bearing numbers. What? This number. This is the correct one. This is the correct one. If you use this Dharana, It's coil. This is bearing. Dharana panata. This act bearing this number, whatever. So two meanings. You can't ignore it. You can't ignore the last letter. And even my Tamil colleagues that work with me, what they say is, even in Tamil there are such issues. Which nana, which lana, right? To use. So, but what I say is, you have to use it. Now, if you are not sure about which one is the correct spelling, then you have to do some research. But that's only one time. After you do that, you don't need to look it up again. Why I say that this is important? Why do I stress on this? Right? 3 reasons. One, search engines. One is search engines. Why? Now say a person who wants to Google, now people type in Sinhala and Tamil in Google and they do perform searches. They just don't type only in English. They type in Unicode and they perform a search. So we have to have a standard. We have to have a standard term. If someone is looking up for research purpose or educational material, say it may be a school, a university student or a school child who needs to get some information for his assignment, then we need to provide them with the correct information, and it should be discoverable via Google, because Google indexes this all. So some people, what they do is to find the correct spelling, say which dharana, they go to Google, they type the first dharana, right? And then they say, okay, no, this is not the best example, right? And they say, okay, how many number of results from this dharana? Then they type another dharana. Okay, how many results on that? Which one has the more results? But that's not the best way. That's not the best way, right? So because with SEO applies to these as well. SEO applies to Unicode as well. Do not ignore. Do not ignore. So that's a point that I want to stress. And the last point, proofread and proofread your content, because content is king, they say. Still even in SEO they say content is king. So if content is king, then the king should be proper and very good looking over it. So proofread and proofread, not only once, twice. If you compile your document, your article, give it to someone else. Never proofread your own document, right? Then to wrap it up, my last slide is not necessarily with anything to do with translations, but a couple of considerations. Context. Remember I told you about the blog and mouse here, that slide, right? Now say your website may be a government website. It may be an official website of your company. It may be your personal blog or your personal website, and it may be a community website, whatever. So depending on the context, your translation freedom varies. If you are working on your official website or the government website, they are very particular. They are very particular on the spellings, they are very particular on the grammar, they are very particular on the terms you use. So in these contexts, you may not be able to use mouse here. For example, you may not be able to use blog as it is in that context. But if it's your personal blog or if it's a community page, who cares? It's you and it's your car, your petrol, you can do whatever you want. Because in some community sites, there are a mix of languages. There are Singlish, there are Tanglish, there are several languages used in the same blog, in the same community website. Even we do it in our websites, but not in a government or official capacity, right? So the context is very important, and your translators also should be aware of it. And the use of Unicode, this is not anything to do with this topic, but I wanted to stress on it because there are still the websites that don't use Unicode. They use a variety of fonts that are non-standard and people cannot read and understand. Even very famous gossip sites don't use Unicode, but what I stress is to use Unicode because that's the standard and follow the standard. So that's about it. Any questions?
So when you're translating, and you said like you need to know your user base. So for example, you're translating the word download. Okay. If I'm correct, it's Bhagata Karan, right?
Karan.
So I don't know how many people will understand that over here. So you probably use something
Download
Karanna in Sinhala. But then some English, not English, some Sinhala professor might argue saying, you know, that's wrong Sinhala. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, the purists.
Yeah, the purists. Yeah.
Bhagata Karan, the context depends.
Especially if you're looking at like, you know, a proper organizational website as opposed to just a blog.
Well, then I prefer the Bhagata Karan, right, instead of download Karan. But then, now say you're a company and exactly. You're not a government capacity, right, sort of thing, right? Then you need to address your user base and your customers. They need to understand it because it's about marketing, right? Then download is what they know, of course. Even some go for the slang variety, you know, Baganda.
Yes. I've seen that as well, yeah.
But no, I don't recommend for your context. But you know, so there are lots of varieties. The user base, your audience is what you need to consider.
When sites are translated, like at the beginning it tells you English, Sinhala, Tamil, so you immediately get separated into different sites. I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but do you think there's any way to sort of combine it in a way so that all three languages can sort of occupy the same space?
You mean there's one website with 3 versions, right?
Yeah.
That has become a standard and a norm in government institutions because ICTA they have created a set of guidelines, and within those guidelines you can download it and read it also. They say, okay, this should be like this. At the index page should have the option for the 3 sites, right. Sinhala, Tamil, and English. And when designing, now that's why I said that comes under localization. You know, that the architecture and the development comes into play there. Every page should have its corresponding Sinhala, every English page should have its corresponding Sinhala and Tamil versions. So regarding government institutions, websites of government institutions, yes, that's how it works. That's how they have implemented it.
Just a quick question about SEO. Right now, instead of having 3 different sites for English, Sinhala, and Tamil, if you have a site that has dynamic content where you have one page, but based on your selection of English, Sinhala, or Tamil, the content is presented to the user, how would you go about doing SEO for that for all 3 languages? Would you just have SEO for all 3 languages there anyway? Or is there another way to sort of change the SEO, change the metas based on whatever your language selection is?
For SEO, you need to have 3 unique URLs. Now, when I say 3 unique URLs, right, your language parameter should not be in a session or a cookie, right? If I write, so it should be 3 unique URLs. Say you have my home page .html. That's your English page. Its Sinhala version should be my homepage.html question. Your Sinhala, say S for Sinhala. For Tamil, T. Then it's 3 unique URLs which search engines will index. So it's dynamic, right? It's dynamic because of the variable passing, right? So because of that, it's dynamic. Because when it comes to localization, there are ways to deal with it. Some are fully database driven. Some are just text based and read into templates. But still, the search engine, what a search engine looks in is unique URLs to index. So it's okay if you do it as long as you don't store your language session as a session or a cookie. So it will be perfect for an SEO. But still now, I don't know, there's a common SEO practice that do not use very long dynamic URLs with lots of variables, you know. And so they do a URL rewrite or whatever, that's much preferred. Though that's something to be handled by the search engine itself. Okay, bye.
Okay, big thank you to Udendra.
Thank you.